Namaste, good evening. We welcome you all to today's Bhagavad Gita class. The topic of our discussion today will be the continuation of the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. We will quickly go through the summary of our previous meeting. So last time we discussed how the 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are divided into three groups. This is one of the approach out of the several approaches. Each group is associated with one of the saying or the word of the great saying, that is Tattvam Asi, that thou art. And we also try to understand what's the basis of that and how it's interrelated to different chapters. Now, 13th chapter is very important and contains all the occultism, as WQJ has mentioned, and we discussed on a high level about that. Then we also touched upon the higher and lower aspects of Prakriti, the apara Prakriti and the para Prakriti, and both we related and tried to understand how they are correlated to Kshetra, that is a field, and then Purusha, the Kshetrajna, what part of Purusha, or rather how Purusha and Prakriti are playing with each other and how they're interrelated, and the whole so-called manifested universe comprises of that. So in today's meeting, we will do a deep dive and try to understand some very important concepts. We will use lots of examples to understand. So please make some notes if you have any questions, and we can discuss it later. But this will be the basis for further study. So let's try to focus properly and try to understand each of these concepts. For the sake of continuity, we will touch upon one slide which we have already discussed before. However, before that, we need to understand that all our experiences are actually taking place in our mind. So whether we are in this meeting or from birth to death, whatever we experience, whatever we call it as life or states of consciousness, is being perceived or is being played in the field of our mind. So mind is also known as the Raja of senses. We are aware of that. That is the king of senses. In one way, we can think of all our senses as the extension of our mind. So our sight, sound, taste, touch, and all the five senses as an extension of the mind. Now let's try to understand how does the experience occur, or the process of experience. For this, we will use an interesting example. Let's think that you have a dark room, and in that room, why we are saying dark? Because there is no light. The ceiling, the walls, the floor, everything is painted dark, or let's say it's black color. So unless and until there is a source of light, if you are inside the room, you will not see anything. Either it's sunlight or artificial light, doesn't matter. Let's call this state of the room as the default state. Now let's introduce a table, a chair, and a mirror in the room. Still, we won't be able to see anything in the room unless we have a source of light. Now, as soon as the light comes, whether artificial or natural light, uh, that light actually reflects on the surface of the table, chair, and the mirror. Now, please note that each object is made up of different material. Hence, they reflect the light in different ways. The mirror reflects most of the light. The table, since it's wood and maybe not polished properly, reflects least. But let's say the chair is made of a smooth plastic material or aggregate of some materials. It reflects to a certain extent, which is in between the reflection of the mirror and the table. So three different rates of reflection. Now that reflection enters our eye, and the electrical signals from the brain go to the mind. And somehow from the physical plane to the mental plane, we have an image created in front of the mind's eye. So then the mind's eye sees the object as a vritti or a modification of the mind, since the mind takes the shape of the object while focusing on the object, like water takes the shape of the container in which it is poured. However, the mind still cannot perceive anything unless the light of Atman doesn't shine on the object or on the vritti. In this case, the vritti or the modification which has occurred is the object arising in the field of the mind. And then this vritti was actually arose in the I consciousness, and from the I consciousness it arose in the mind consciousness. So only when the light of the Atman shines on the vrittis, only then the mind is able to perceive. However, as we have also discussed or touched upon this idea before, there arises the notion of I in the mind. I am observing, I am seeing the table and the chair at the mirror. So this becomes, in the Vedantic concepts, the idea of Jivatma, uh, the ego that I am the observer and the doer, and I am observing. And that's when the Maya or delusion arises. And then we think we are this mind body complex who is experiencing, and we are separate from the object being observed, we are separate from the other people, and the whole story of life starts. So, if we were to think of mind as having two aspects, this is only one mind, but one part of the mind is mostly geared towards the buddhi, and other more attached toward kama. So we are separating logically to understand, and on the left we have the object. As soon as the I consciousness captures and passes it on to the mind consciousness, the object, a vritti arises. And vritti is like a thought associated with an elemental. So skanda is also forming. So you can think of, there is a birth of a thought, there is a prime life of a thought, and then there is a death of that thought. So this is happening in lightning speed, but the mind is not able to perceive it unless the Atman shines its light on the vritti. Once it shines its light, based on the light of the Atman, only the mind is able to work. It's like the electricity provided to this vehicle or the tool or the apparatus. Once the electricity is provided, it works. So something from that perspective we can think of. But once it perceives the object, as discussed, the notion of I am perceiving, I am seeing, I am analyzing, so on and so forth arises, which gives the side effect of creation of Jivatma. So it's the light of Atma itself reflected in the upadhi of the manas, which results to the reflected light labeled as Jivatma. And the Atman is also, you can label it as Kutastha, the higher self, the witness consciousness. The witness is actually observing all this. But the delusion occurs that the mind body complex thinks that I am observing it. And it is because of me I am able to comprehend, understand, and take a decision. So, mind, you can think of it as the field in this perspective, kshetra. Now, this mind is a field in all three states, Jagrat, Swapna, Shushapti, that is waking, sleep, and deep sleep. And Atman, the knower of the field, is Kshetrajna. And then, similarly, in dream state, the mind creates, projects the object. So we don't have a table, chair, and a mirror, or whatever story we are playing in the mind in our dream. We don't have those objects, but the mind only creates and projects it. Projects in the sense of vrittis arise. When vrittis arise, the mind is able to perceive those creations with the light of the Atman when it's shining. But when we are in Shushupti state, deep sleep, there are no objects. So it's akin to that dark room which we just discussed, the concept of the dark room. So then we see that all these states, Jagrat, Swapna, Shushupti, actually arise and disappear periodically. in the field of the fourth, that is the Turiya. The light of Turiya is the substratum. In that field is these states of Jagrat, Swapna, and Shushupti arising and then disappearing, arising and then disappearing. There is a periodic cyclic effect of that. And we, the witness, if you think from the Atman, Kshetrajna, knower of the field perspective, if the awareness is there, we are actually able to ascertain and be aware that yes, I slept, I dreamt, I came back from the state of deep sleep, and so on and so forth. So each one of us can actually do that. So we can actually shift to that witness position and be aware of that. Now, the next slide will provide a very in-depth idea of this, but it's very important for us to understand these concepts. So this we have discussed in our initial discussions. So I will not go into each aspect of it, but you get the idea that from the left to the right, we have all the layers of our vehicles, the upadhis, and we have all the sheets. And on the extreme far left, we have the physical external plane. And from there, the inputs are getting into eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and all sense consciousness. There is a point of contact. Each point of contact filters the information based on our skandhas and the gunas which are there in each layer. And it goes to the brain consciousness and then to the mind consciousness, where everything aggregated together, multiple inputs through multiple senses aggregated are presented to the mind consciousness as one object, not many objects, one object. And then with the light of Atman, it ascertains. So the light of Atman is actually shining on the object in the mind, and it's also shining through all the sheets. None of eye consciousness will not be able to work, ear consciousness will not be able to work, and so on and so forth, if the light of Atman is not shining on it. It's not providing it the electricity to work, if you think of it as an apparatus. Now, an interesting thing happens that each layer, each sheath is also a field. So you have on top, you see field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, so and so forth. So each field is actually a kshetra because it's independent on its own. It's got its own attributes. So like the chair, the table, the mirror, each sheath or each field has its own qualities, has its own gunas, has its own skandhas, has its own properties. So when the light of Atman shines, it reflects the objects in that field in different ways depending on the gunas and the properties of that field. Now, that particular reflection results in a comprehension and ascertainment of that experience. But at the same time, what happens is that we also realize that if you take all these fields together as an aggregate, they form the field, which is the kshetra. So all sevenfold layers, if you take, they itself are the kshetra, and Atman, if you see on the far right, is the knower of the field, also known as Kuthastha, also known as the witness. So while all this is happening, and each layer, the perceptions or the working of each layer when it happens with the light of the Atman, depending on what thought, what action, and what experience is happening, you have these skandhas, all these dots which are arising are these skandhas which are dynamically being created. So you have the center of energy and the elementals getting associated with the thought, skandhas forming, new skandhas forming, new thoughts arising, and so on and so forth. Or a chain of previous thoughts getting more strong. So there could be multiple permutation and combinations. But each layer, either you are creating skandhas in the same direction or the skandhas in different direction. But the qualities or the gunas of each layer is also dynamically changing, depending on our thought, speech, and action. So, what's the final outcome of this is that our future lives are also being formed dynamically. So, the net of our current life is, or our current state is guiding the net of the future state, the so-called future state. So karma is also working dynamically from that perspective. And in all fields, the sense of I is arising. So in the physical, we think we are this body. I am this body. My name is Mr. X, Miss Y, and I am an engineer or a doctor or a husband or a father or a friend or so and so. And then in the mind, the I arises. I am the doer, I am observing, and I am performing the action. This is my ambitions, this is my goal, this is the story of my life, and so on and so forth. So each layer, each principle or vehicle, if you may call, I is arising, and the delusion in the suffering arises because based on the false notion of I, we perform certain actions. We, the basis, the foundation of our thought, speech, and action changes based on that limited I. But in truth, we are none of these fields, we are none of these bodies, and we are the Atman. So if we really were working from the perspective of the Kutastha or the knower, the witness, then we will not fall prey to this false notion of I, and we will think, speak, and act based on non separateness, based on the idea of the witness consciousness, and perform our duties, and so on and so forth. But another important thing happens because of all these skandhas which are created, especially in the mind field. There are certain set of seed thoughts or skandhas, or we can think of it as mental deposits which are created. These mental deposits, WQJ also mentions, that leads to certain kinds of situations in life and become seeds for diseases and disharmony also. So think of these skandhas or seed thoughts as either harmonious or disharmonious, either one with all or having some disharmony. The disharmonious seeds are sown in the field of the manas, like you sow the seeds in the field in for an agricultural purpose. So those seed may ripe again depending on the situation which is provided by the life. So in a particular life, certain seeds may not sprout. In certain life situations or in another life, if the soil is appropriate, the sunlight and the water provide is appropriate, that means the circumstances, the environment, the family condition, the karma, the cycles are appropriate, those seeds may ripe, sprout. Certain physical situations, certain disease, or maybe some mental situations, mental conditions, or certain new traits, and so on and so forth, may sprout and arise. And again, it depends on the net karma, the situation, the cycles, and so on and so forth. So we see how the big impact is happening and the idea of the kshetra. Now, all these layers are nothing but prakriti. So the Purusha is the Atman, the witness, and everything is Prakriti, starting from Buddhi onwards. And there are different layers and grades of Prakriti which are there. So next we see a very important concept about how this is happening on the macrocosmic level and the microscopic level, or in the cosmos and in man. Now, let's not get scared by these terms, and if you don't understand this slide, it's okay. This is slightly introducing some Vedantic terms, but it's not necessary because these are not mentioned in the vocabulary of Theosophy, but it's a good example to understand. So on the top, if you see, you have Brahman, absolute consciousness. Now, that is the only reality. From there, the light of Brahman on the macroscopic scale, if it shines, but it shines or reflects on the Maya Upadhi, then what happens is the the byproduct of that or the reflected light which you see is Ishvara at a macroscopic, at the cosmic level. But the same light of Brahman, when it is conditioned on a microscopic level in man, then the the reflected light or the aspect of that in man is known as Kutastha or Atman. So think of Parabrahman, which is actually Brahman here, the absolute consciousness. From that perspective, if you think, you can also label it as Paramatma, and a ray of that is Atma, which we are calling Kutastha on the top left, the two blue circles. So Atman, the light of Atman, when it shines through the avidya upadhi, in this case, the avidya or the ignorance is happening in the mind field. You can think of from that perspective and the example which we just went through. So when the light of Atman shines through the manasic field, the I arises in the mind. So the jiva arises. Jiva Atma arises. Jiva is actually the monad, but here we are saying Jiva Atman, which is the I consciousness arising only in the upadhi of the mind. Now, similarly, the example below is given about the Mahakasha and the Ghata Akasha. So I'll just go quickly through that, and if even if you don't understand that, it's okay. But let's attempt to understand that. So Mahakasha is the total space, the entire universe, or if you go outside in an open field, if you see the entire sky without any clouds, clean blue sky, that is the Mahakasha. And then if you have a glass with you, or a ghata, or a pot with you, and you see, okay, the air which is in the glass, so the glass is half full, half empty. Half empty is the Ghatakasha. So it's an aspect of that bigger space. You have smaller space, but this smaller space is contained in this. And then when the light of the sun actually reflects through the upadhi of a cloud, let's say there is a blue sky and the cloud is passing through, and the light of the sun reflects or passes through that cloud, that is known as the Mega Akasha. This cloud is actually full of moisture, raindrops. It's a rain cloud, so Megha, and it's a Mega Akasha. And now, when I take this glass and walk in that open field, when the cloud was not there, this open sky, blue sky was there. That light of blue sky was coming into this Ghata Akasha, or this air in the pot or the glass, and that air was reflecting that light going through this air reflected on the surface of the water. So the surface of water was actually seeing the result of the light passing through this air. But suddenly, when the cloud came, the light reflected in the cloud then passed through this glass. So, what happened on the surface of the glass? I had the light which was creating a reflection based on the light passed through the cloud space. So that is the whole concept, that whenever the light of the Atman shines in a particular upadhi, the resultant is an I, and the quality of that I or the label of that I is different because of the gunas of that particular upadhi. So even this slide, if you don't understand, that's okay. It's the same idea. If you see the two columns on the right hand side of the table on the left, you have the Upadhi as Stula Sharira from the last row, and on the right it says Jagrat, hall of ignorance. So when the light of Atman shines in the Stula Upadhi, the label of that reflected light is Vishwa. When the light of the Atman shines in the Linga Sharira or the astral body, the label of that reflected light is known as Tejasa. When the light of the Atman shines in the Karana Upadhi or Sharira, the label of that reflected light is known as Prajna. So when we are in Jagrat, the light of the Atman shining through physical is expressing itself as Vishwa, and Tejasa in dream, and Prajna in Shushupti. So similarly, on the left, two columns, if we see of the table on the left, we have the light of the absolute shining through Avyakta or the Maya Upadhi. The resultant is reflected light Ishvara. When it's shining through the Upadhi of the Hiranya Garbha, the reflected light labeled is as Sutratma. When it's shining through the Upadhi of Viraj, the reflected light is labeled as Vaishwanara. The same idea is provided in the on the table on the right. I'll not go through this, but you can read when you're free. Now, the idea is each of these levels has 7 sub-levels. So you can think of Prajna having 7 grades, Tejasa having 7 grades, Vishwa having 7 grades, so on and so forth. But like I said, it's not necessary for you to understand this. This is just an FYI information provided to you. And if you understand this, very good. Now, the next is the same idea expressed in a very different way. So at the center, you have the Atman, and all the sheets are there up until the physical. The light of Atman is shining through all these sheets. And all these are in different planes of consciousness, different levels of consciousness, different gunas, different prakritis. So you can say each sheath is having many seeds and skandhas, as we discussed. Each sheath is a kshetra, the field. All sheaths collectively are also the kshetra or the field. And each sheath, we can say, have 2 aspects. So we say the astral vehicle and the astral principle. So the matter aspect of each sheath is the vehicle aspect, the upadhi, the prakriti aspect. The spirit aspect of each sheath is the principle, the purusha or the kshetragna. Because actually, if you see, and we go back to page 200 diagram also of Secret Doctrine, you can actually have the whole page 200 diagram in each of these sheets. So ideally, you can have the Atman in each, or the Atman corresponding aspect in each of these sheets. So you can have actually the Kshetragnya in each of these sheets. So from that perspective, each sheet has a principal aspect and a vehicle aspect, a spirit aspect and a matter aspect, a Purusha aspect, a Prakriti aspect, a Kshetragnya aspect and a Kshetra aspect. So you get the idea. And then we can take this a level further, that all manifested world, all the objects in the manifested world, everything is actually having the same idea of kshetra and kshetragna. Even if it is an inanimate object, still the same is happening. There is a latent capability in that to have the various other sheets active. You may say a table does not think. Yes, a table does not think. But the table again has the potentiality of all the other layers to get active. In animal, also you have certain principles or vehicles active, like manas and buddhi are not developed, and but you have the physical astral prana going on in kama to some extent. So we can apply this formula to everything. So what is that in this whole manifested or the so-called manifested universe, which is not having both Kshetra and Kshetragna, nothing. But even beyond that, there is that which is apart from the spirit and matter. So we'll try to understand that further. Think of this block as one label, one word, spirit matter, or you can also call it as Purusha Prakriti. And then you can also see that when the spirit matter splits into or differentiates or manifests or spirit descends into matter, then what happens is that we have this block and it has two extremes, and you can see the color difference. So there is gradations of colors happening. So the top extreme, you can say it as the spirit as aspect of it, and the bottom extreme of the spectrum you can say is matter or prakriti aspect. But it's the same thing, but now it's differentiated. And then you have different grades of spirit or purusha, and then you have different grades of matter prakriti. So from the gross to the subtlest, from bottom to top, it's on an ascending scale, but it's the same spirit matter, but now you have a different perspective of it. And prakriti has gunas, and on the top block, if you see spirit matter, it's in a condition of or a state where these gunas are latent but in harmony. They balance each other, they are in equilibrium. But later what we are seeing, that these gunas are disturbed because in maya, or you can also call it mula prakriti, when the light of the absolute shines through it, it creates this spanda or the vibration. That vibration disturbs the balance of the gunas. Once the balance of the gunas is triggered or disturbed periodically, then arises this different states of prakriti, and we see this block on the left, which is the so-called separation of spirit and matter. We can also say these are different grades of prakriti. That's all. We can also say this is different grades of spirit. So there are two different aspects. Or we can say it's that one spirit matter from Prakriti onwards, it is going to the subtle and subtle level of spirit. But it's all one. And that one actually becomes the many. And the one becomes many because the perceiver, that is us, the man, perceives in such a way. And that perception is false. Because the moment a vritti arises in the mind, the tool of perception, I arises, as we discussed, and the delusion arises that I am this person who is observing. I am separate from the object being perceived. That object could be the whole of humanity, the whole of cosmos, or whatever in it. So that separation arises. And then we get deluded. So we see that only when a being exists to perceive, when the I exists at whatever level, I consciousness, only then the cognizer arises. Otherwise, you're not able to perceive or cognize. But the absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, the thing cognized, and the cognition, and all three in itself, and all three are actually one. But all of these, the cognizer, the cognized, and the cognition, are an illusion because there is only one reality, and we are that reality. But we get deluded and we get confused. And based on that delusion and confusion, we take wrong steps or disharmonious steps. We generate karma, we generate skandhas, and then we get stuck in this cycle of samsara. Same idea if you take on with respect to the page 200 diagram, and you apply the whole of page 200 diagram as you see on the left hand side in each of the globes. So you have the, from one perspective, you see Purusha is at each level. So we can think of correspondingly, Purusha is at each level and Kshetragnya is at each level. And we are saying that third logos, Mahat Brahma, corresponds to Kshetragnya, while the whole of the manifestation, that is the four rupas, correspond to the Kshetra. And then from another perspective, we can say that the three arupa planes correspond to the kshetrajna, while the rupa plane correspond to kshetra. So again, it's correspondence. We are not saying it's not written in rock that it is so and so, but it helps us to understand on a macroscopic scale applying these ideas. And then we can say each plane has its own corresponding kshetra, the field, and kshetrajna. And then we are saying the whole of the so-called manifested universe is spirit matter in different grades. So different grades of spirit, different grades of matter, different grades of consciousness. So aggregate of all the states and grades of spirit and matter and or consciousness is the so-called manifested universe of the world and nothing else. And then in order to understand this, Bhagavad Gita says that if you want to really understand this, you need to have some qualifications. And these qualifications are provided in the five shlokas from shloka 8 of chapter 13 to shloka 12 of chapter 13. And in WQJ rendition, it talks about these qualities as follows. It says, true wisdom of a spiritual kind is freedom from self-esteem, hypocrisy, injury to others, patience, sincerity, respect for spiritual instructors, purity, firmness, self-restraint, dissipation of objects of sense, freedom from pride, and a meditation upon birth, death, decay, sickness, so on and so forth. Now, if you were to read the shloka in Sanskrit and try to understand these qualities, there are actually 20 important qualifications or the qualities which the student disciple needs to develop in themselves. And only then they are qualified. That is the entry level or the entry criteria for you to perform this yoga in order to understand in depth the whole idea about Kshetra and Kshetrajna. So, what are those? We'll just quickly touch upon them. So, you have the first one as amanitvam, which is humility, and then you have the adambhitvam, which is unpretentiousness, then ahimsa, which is non-injury, shanti, forgiveness, or you can also say forbearance. Then you have uh, arjavam, which is uprightness of speech. Then you have acharya upasanam, which is the respect and service to the teacher, the love and respect which you have for your teacher. So if you don't have these virtues, you can not proceed on this path. So these are all mandatory. Then you have saucham, that is purity, purity of all the sheaths, purity of the physical sheath, purity of the mental sheath, purity of the astral sheath, and so on and so forth. Then you have sthairyam, that is steadiness. And then you have atma vinigra, self-control, vairagyam, and anahakaram, that is absence of egoism, not association with any of these sheets. Like Shankaracharya says, neti, neti, neti. I am not the physical body, I am not the astral body, I am not the kama, I am not the desire body, I am not the manasik, I am not the buddhik, I am that, I am the Atman. And then you have the dosha, anudarshanam, that is perception of evils of birth, death, and decay and disease. So you are meditating on the temporary nature of life. You are meditating on birth, death, decay, that these are inevitable. Every moment is precious. Every moment is an opportunity. Every moment you are coloring the skandhas, you are coloring your future life, and so on and so forth. So the whole meditation behind that, every moment you are aware, you are not getting entangled with the temporary nature of this elusive life, which leads to asakti, which is non-attachment, also a kind of vairagya. And then you have anabhishwangaha, which is non-identification with your friends, family, wife, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of attachment with our families, friends, wife, children, and our whole life starts revolving around that. But think of a very important thing. If this body itself doesn't belong to me, if this body itself, or if all these body itself are temporary, then how can a wife, child, friend property, etc. belong to me. Then comes sama chittavam, which is constant even-mindedness, or you are in a state of equal-mindedness, ekagrata, equanimity. Then ananya yoga, yoga of non-separateness. So if you associate yourself with any of these I in the sheets, then you will say, okay, I am so and so, my life story is so and so. And the moment you say that, you separate yourself with the whole of the universe. And then there comes the problem. So the moment you take the stand of the witness, what happens is then you're not separating yourself with anyone else. All you're performing is your duty in life. And that's all. No action other than the duty is being performed. And then you have the Vivikta Desha Sevitam, which is resorting to solitary place. So the whole idea is that what is your priority in life? Are you engaging most of your time, your mind is engaging in the external senses, the noise which is coming from the external world, which is subduing the noise of your consciousness, or you are bringing back your senses from the external world, concentrating inwards and pointing it to that one high seed thought, always continuously thinking of higher self, the Krishna, or letting it go out. It's not necessary that you're going to solitary places or sitting in a cave, but that's the idea. And then you have Arati Jnana Samsadi, which is a distaste of society and worldly men, which goes with the previous one, and Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam, which is constancy in self knowledge. You are always 24 by 7, your mind is on the higher self, and you're trying to understand the higher ideas and live your life accordingly, and your mind is always there. Then finally, you have Tattva Jnana Artha Darshanam, which is perception of the uh, end of true knowledge, which means your whole life is fixed. The purpose, the highest priority of your life is to gain that liberation while you are living in this physical body, to know the truth, to perform your duty for humanity. Nothing else is important. So that is the highest priority. So what is the roadmap for this? How do we achieve this? Bhagavad Gita provides 4 phases. In fact, these 4 phases are given in the chapter 13. So the first one is Jnanam, and it deals with knowledge. And this is those 20 qualities which we discussed from Shloka 8 to 12, which needs to be developed. Then phase 2, wherein it deals with, it points to the truth and how to actually achieve that. So those are, or rather realize that. So those are Shloka 13 to 8. We can discuss it in later section, or you can go through those on your own. It's pretty self-explanatory. Phase 3 is the mumukshutva, wherein you have this intense desire. Like we always say, intense desire from the perspective of the only goal is to achieve, to know that truth and come out of the bondage. And the phase 4 is the whole process of practically implementing this, which goes through the entire Bhagavad Gita. So 3 and 4 is actually the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. So finally, we see that 26th shloka mentions about, O best of the Bharatas, whatever moving or unmoving being you see in the existence, know it to be a combination of the Kshetra and Kshetrajna. And couple of important points we have from Subarao. He says, Kshetra means nothing more than the Upadhi or vehicle, and Kshetrajna is the ego in all its forms and manifestation. Kshetra springs from Mula Prakriti. Even matter has a logos, all its own. Do not put it into some impious use. So Gerard de Nerval was a poet and author, and this is a very interesting quote, because we may think of an inanimate object and we may think, okay, we can do whatever with it. But let's not do that. If you want to realize the Kshetrajna, you must separate the ego from the body. And when you begin to realize the real Purusha, avidya disappears and you will attain to knowledge, Bhavani Shankar. And finally, we see WQJ provides this very interesting quote: "As a single sun illuminates the whole world, even so doth the one spirit illumine everybody. He who seeth the supreme spirit or supreme being existing alike, imperishable in all perishable things, sees indeed. Perceiving the same Lord present in everything and everywhere, he does not, by the lower ahankara, that is the I, destroy his own soul, but go it to the supreme end." And because of Purusha only invested in Prakriti, you are feeling this pain, pleasure. And then finally, we have these quotes you can see. Because time is running out, we'll pause here. Over to Jerry.